Welcome everyone to a Prelude episode of Developer Dialogue. Before we publish this week's episode, which features the developer of Burden of Command, we decided to republish our original 2018 interview we did with this innovative developer. We hope you enjoyed this interview and be sure to come back tomorrow for the sequel interview. Welcome everyone to an interview with the lead designer behind Burden of Command, Luke Hughes. Welcome, Luke. How are you doing?
Hey, how you doing?
Not bad, not bad. And of course, I have Matt, the historical gamer, on too. How you doing, Matt?
Doing great.
All right. So this is a podcast that interview I wanted to do for a while because ever since I saw this game being announced, Burden of Command, months and months ago, this game has been fascinating both me and Matt because it is so innovative and different from every other strategy game out there. If you can jump in, Luke, and tell us about your game and what it's all about, and
Well, Burden of Command is a World War II role-playing game. And what are you role-playing? You're playing the leader of an infantry company in World War II, specifically part of the relatively famous cotton balers, which are a U.S. regiment that is known for being the only regiment to be in all the U.S. wars since 1812. So what makes it distinctive, besides being a leadership RPG? Well, what's distinctive? That it's a leadership RPG. Those are hard to find. Not sure I know another one. That it's a World War II RPG, also a bit rare. And finally, that we try to be emotionally authentic, meaning we try to face, obviously, the burden of command, what it is to lead humans and people into war where they don't want to die, rather than just strategy and tactics.
So I'm kind of curious, what was your inspiration to make this game? Because a game like mixing strategy genre and RPG genre, as far as I know, I haven't encountered another game like this. Maybe, there is one, but I haven't seen it or even played it. So what kind of inspired you to take these two different genres, combine them, and then put it into World War II?
Well, of course, the muse came down one night and said, Luke, this is going to be the game, and here are the aspects. All right. I wish that had happened. What really happened was slightly random walk to getting lucky. My father was an historian in history of technology, and he studied inventors. And one of the things, invention, they say about invention is chance favors a prepared mind. So there was chance, and I'd like to think I had maybe the prepared mind. So this started really a very simple idea. Maybe it would have been good too, which was, hey, what if you took Panzer General and put it at the squad level? And then as I kept studying it and looking at that, I got more and more interested in the leaders. As really, I was thinking, well, they should be part of the system in the same way squad leader, or think of your favorite tactical game puts leaders in. I wasn't having anything terribly innovative, to be honest. And then two things happened. One thing happened is I was playing Crusader Kings 2 one night, and suddenly hit me, wouldn't it be interesting to follow a family of officers through the war? Band of brothers. And the more I thought about it, I thought, oh my God, it'd be cool. What if the whole war is going on and you're just a little group, but you're going through the theaters and what could happen? So that was really the genesis. And then I'd say the other key influence was it was probably still going to be fundamentally a tactical game with a heavy influence and emphasis on the leaders. And very light role playing in the sense that they would develop and so forth. But I started listening to writer podcasts. I wanted to bring writers in for doing barks and making it more emotional, making you care about the men. And this writer podcast, basically they said, hey, it sucks as writers because we're always called in the last moment to fix a game. They've done all the gameplay, and then they have us show up and we're supposed to make it, narratively interesting when they've already decided everything. And they said, the right way to do it is to bring the writers in early. So I, being young and innocent, well, not that young, but at least innocent, drank the Kool-Aid and got the writers in early. So I got, Alan Geese and Paul Wang in, their interactive fiction writers. And they, of course, strangely enough, want to write. So guess what? When I released them to do barks and little things like that, suddenly it turned into much more of a Shadowrun, Hong Kong Returns, or a Banner Saga, where there's a strong story and a narrative. And these are very developed characters. And so really it's a story-driven RPG that is also a tactical game. So the analogy would be like I gave Banner Saga, right? There's definitely a tactical side. you'd recognize it as a historical tactical game, but it's got a very strong story component, and you've got characters and lieutenants to report to you as captain, and you may get them killed or you may help them develop.
It's interesting you bring up the killed piece. Everything here that you're saying sounds really interesting, and I kind of, if I'm looking for that game that it reminds me of, because you're right, there really aren't any other games out there at a tactical turn-based type of a game that I can think of like this. But the one game that it kind of does make me think about is the Brothers in Arms series. So Road to Hill 30 or Hell's Highway, where there's a very strong narrative that those games portray around your small units as you go through a real-time, more of a shooter type of a tactical game. But the thing that game always lacked for me was any dynamism behind the actual outcomes, right? Essentially, the game was scripted. You had to go to the end of the mission, and it was telling a story. And I think it was trying to kind of uncover some of the challenges that you're talking about from a leadership perspective or from a small unit perspective. But there was no ability to have an alternate outcome. And I guess that'd be one question that I have for you is, does this game allow for varied outcomes? It looks like on your website you've got 18 different scenarios in the campaign that you go through during the course of a playthrough. But is it essentially, you have to meet certain outcomes and certain people can't die and you just move forward? Or is there a little bit of flexibility there to have a very different end state than you may otherwise have?
Educate me a little bit. I've only played very limited amount of sort of first person shooters, so I've heard good things about Brothers in Arms. Is permadeath in that or not?
It is not. So essentially, It is basically like Call of Duty, but at a more personal level within
I've
you.
played the recent Call of Duty, so a couple of comparisons there. You're absolutely right. They do have a strong story. So in that sense, we're not distinctive. On the other hand, viscerally incredibly effective. So I'll just draw on my Call of Duty experience, and then I'll get to how much flexibility there is. In Call of Duty, my God, pretty intimidating to get on the battlefield. I was really appropriately overwhelmed on Omaha Beach. But, it started to change for me as soon as I died and instantly reloaded and died and instantly reloaded. And so
wait, are you saying that's not how war works?
Only depending on which version you play. So, at that point, that changed it. So the answer in our case is I'll give the positive side, and then I don't want to over pitch it. So on the positive side, yeah, almost anybody can die. We have one character who's kind of playing an instructional role. He can't die. I'm not going to tell you who, because then you cheat. But he's not really on the map. He's just sort of almost like the tutor. But everybody else really can die, and meaning your lieutenants and you. And there's we're I'm sure people will find some hack pretty easily, but we're certainly not going to make it. There's no reload intended, right? Like a Darkest Dungeon. So we'll try to make it hard for you, and so you feel like it matters if you send that person up the hill. So in that sense, yes, it can absolutely change who ends up surviving. That's one way it can change. Second way it can change is we wanted to create a journey for you, a leadership journey, as well as for your lieutenants, meaning who are you going to be as a leader? Who are you actually in the battlefield as opposed to who you imagined? And how do we articulate that? Our idea there in RPG is mindsets. So mindset might be something like caution or zeal. If you think of Band of Brothers, Lieutenant Spears, the madman who runs across the field in front of German fire, and the Germans are so stunned they don't shoot at him. That's a guy with zeal, right? So you will pick these mindsets, and to some extent your NPC lieutenants will, and you can develop very distinctly that way. And as you become, if you think zealous is wonderful, which has impacts in the narrative and impacts on the battlefield, you'll find that you can't be cautious very easily. So, and I can talk about that more. Now, to answer fairly, on the other hand, it is story-driven, and it's a linear campaign. You don't branch in the campaign at the campaign level. You won't go to different scenarios, but you can lose scenarios, and there are consequences. But it's not, oh my God, I must win every scenario. You might decide to lose a scenario to preserve your men.
I like that.
So how you fight the battles, absolutely, you have a lot of choices there. How people survive and evolve, you definitely have choices there. And again, I'd make the analogy something like a Banner Saga, where you have a reasonable degree of control, but there's a clear story driving it. So I don't want to pretend this is a sandbox.
Wow.
So I'm kind of curious. So you were mentioning I'll be a leader of a company. So when you have that company, do you have a list of a roster of every soldier in that company from privates all the way up to captain and stats for each?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and that makes me immediately think of Close Combat. I imagine some of your listeners have played that. And what was wonderful there was, every person had a name, and I think stats too, and were modeled. Unfortunately, I remember one of the standard critiques there of what was a wonderfully innovative game, I want to be clear, was, they die about the time you got to know them, which actually might be pretty realistic, frankly. But we had a different goal. Which was to have you get to know a few people well so that you'd care. So they weren't just sprites on the field. If you play Panzer General, you start to care because when a unit's getting a few stars, if somebody survived long enough in close combat, you start to care. A good classic RPG makes you care because you've really spent time on a few characters. So to answer your question, we limited the number of individuals you're worrying about with the intent that you could get to know a few people well. So you would develop empathy and emotional connection so that you would feel the burden of command. Burden of command being that you are responsible for their lives and you give a damn. You give a damn for reasons of permadeath and playing well. And you give a damn because you might care about them as people. So to be even more concrete, we don't individually model in this path each member of the squad in any interesting sense. We do count how many soldiers in there. And someday we might do that. But it's really not critical to the thing we're trying to achieve. You should think of this as your band of brothers that you're trying to lead through the war, and you're getting to know them and who they are as individuals. And one of the critiques that's consistently leveled at us when people watch teasers and so forth, those who know, is they say, "Oh, what the hell is this? These lieutenants are leading the squads. That should be the sergeants." And that's right. But again, we abstract. So you should think of you have about 4 lieutenants reporting to you as the captain, and you have also your first sergeant. You should think of them sort of a proxy for the actual number of NCOs, sergeants, and corporals, and so forth. And there's an executive officer that we're not modeling explicitly, because again, we have an emotional goal to communicate to you the experience of being responsible for other people's lives in war, not just winning the mission.
Wow. Yeah, that's so. Yeah, I totally feel you because like when you watch Band of Brothers, you don't know every single soldier in that company. Like Malarkey and Sergeant. Well, I'm a loss for names, but there was a whole bunch of them. Sergeant.
You know them. You recognize them. You know how they act.
Yes.
Well, some of them got to die too, so you can't care about all of them. But in this case, it sounds like you may lose the guys that you care about, and I think that's one of the interesting and appealing things about what this game looks like is that element of emotional attachment that you guys are trying to convey that most games, to your point, really don't address. I guess I do have one question because we've jumped into talking about this game a little bit, but I wonder if it might help. Can you kind of give us a in your mind, like how a scenario will progress, or like what does a scenario look like? If I was trying to tell someone what the gameplay experience would be for this game, maybe you could provide a quick overview of what an individual scenario would look like, so that to someone who hasn't seen the trailer, they kind of would have a little bit more of a detailed understanding of what to expect.
Absolutely. But I'd love to return to, how we make you care about the men, because that's an interesting topic, especially in a strategy game. So, my analogy, I'll start with some analogies and say where it's different. So if you were to play a Shadowrun or a Banner Saga, you've got a story going on that frames why the scenario is happening, and then you've got your people on the field. But most of these tactical games of the RPG style are individuals, right? You have your 4, whether fantasy or whatever they are, characters, or 6 characters, and they're single people. In our case, you'd have a map, hexagonal map, so that should please all the classic strategy gamers and the grognards. And on it, you have a mix of squads, meaning about 8 to 10 people, and a few individuals. And the individuals are your lieutenants and yourself. You are on the field too. So if you've got your full company going, a company is about 100 people, 3 platoons, each in a ballpark of 30, plus a weapons platoon. Then you have each of those has 3 squads and a lieutenant. So to be concrete, you've kind of got these little packets. You've got 3 squads. You've got a lieutenant running each of those platoons. He's a single individual, typically appearing as a face attached. You can go on our website or Steam and see some of the images to make this more concrete. Might be good to do it now if you're listening. And they're typically attached to squad, meaning you see their face. So they can run around as a little single sprite, though I wouldn't advise that. Leaders running around in the open is really a pretty tempting target. And you, depending on the scenario, you have up to a full company, 3 to 4 platoons with weapon platoons there. Sometimes you'll have some support, from outside forces. For instance, Rangers might make an appearance in Sicily. We try to stick to the history. You don't get many tanks, so don't get too hopeful.
That was one of my questions.
Get something though occasionally, but we're trying to stick to history. These are grunts, they're out in the mud, and it's not glamorous, and they aren't going to be handed wonderful toys to play with. They got to make it in with low sleep, etc. So that's what it looks like on the map. You've got to do all the classic things that people who play tactical war games would recognize. You've got to worry about cover. You want to suppress the enemy. You don't want to charge across the open against an unsuppressed enemy. Suppress means you fire them lots, so they want to keep their head down so they don't die, which means they don't fire at you well. So I could go on a lot about that, but people who play those kind of games will recognize those mechanisms. But those individuals on the field, right? So our goal is, forget the story for a moment. When you see Dearborn, one of your lieutenants, you see his portrait, you remember him, you know him. And when you order him up the hill with a squad, or if he's, staying back, it's a personal decision, right? And he might have some feelings about it too. And he might not decide to obey, or the squad might not, depending on their morale. I mean, these are people. So what we're trying to get across is, who wants to die, right? So you've got to have some leadership to make things happen on the battlefield. Otherwise, they're like, right, sir, and, they might give you lip service and they don't do much. I'm
kind of curious, since you were mentioning tanks before, is there going to be air support?
Yes, there'll be air support and artillery. But don't get too hopeful. You are the Americans, though, so, artillery won't be so uncommon.
Telling your soldiers what to
eventually, too. We the armor will be less carefully modeled than the infantry in this pass, but I'd love to do something in the spirit of Fury, where you're the officer in a particular tank, and there you get to know the enlisted much more than we do in this campaign. Again, for reasons of limiting the number of characters you have to get to know. There are some enlisted, but your direct reports are your key.
That'd be cool. Burden of Command, Armored Corps.
Yeah, I mean, Steel Panthers. You're in a Steel Panther. Wouldn't that be something?
I will say that the that idea of telling your soldier to do something and maybe they don't carry it out to your satisfaction, to me feels. I just finished reading Stephen W. Sears' book on called Lincoln's Lieutenants, about the high command of the Army of the Potomac during the Civil War, and it's very much like that, giving an officer an order and he basically disregards it or doesn't come anywhere near close to following it out to the spirit of the order, and then you, the commander, have to figure out how the hell you're going to deal with essentially the problem that you were hoping they would address.
Well, I'll give you guys a bit of a scoop tonight. I haven't talked to anyone about this yet, except inside the team, because this is still pretty fresh. But we have a very specific set of where morale checks will happen, based on I think it's fair to say some careful study of battlefield psychology. We've read some careful books, and I've talked to some experts. There's a book called Brains and Bullets, and it has some particular theories about where morale checks, what we call gamers, we call morale checks, happen. A morale check is when the unit essentially rolls dice and says, do I want to follow this order? So what are the cases when that matters? One would be assault. So in World War I, they called it fear of the bayonet, right? Which is people don't particularly like being stabbed with knives. I mean, we're joking around.
I would have thought.
Pretty ugly, right? So one of the things that's probably most intimidating for people is to order them to go to hand-to-hand combat. So that's when you have a decent chance of failing a morale check in your leadership, and in particular a trait called trust, which is how much, we can get into how we do that. But if they trust you, they're more likely to follow your order if they're not suppressed in an assault situation. And the way it really went in combat, I'll give a brief version of this, is first, there was some question whether they follow your order to assault in the first place. Okay, and statistics are that a squad maybe on its own, maybe they have a 20% chance they're willing to go and do something as ugly as that. If they have a relatively trusted, maybe NCO or junior leader, maybe it's something in the order of 40%. These are all very ballpark. I wouldn't claim precision. And if you have a very trusted one, it's about 70%. So the thing you should be taking away there, leaders really matter. And leaders don't just mean the lieutenants, so we tend to focus on them for simplicity. They matter. The sergeants, arguably, and corporals may matter more. But you've got to have leaders standing up and saying, "Follow me," and setting the example and risking their lives for others to risk their lives, right? And then the next thing that happens is when you get close to the enemy is starting to have the same calculus. Right, here come these guys. I'm under fire. My head's down. Oh my God, they're coming to kill me personally. Now, how many people want to die intimately like that? So what typically happened was not melee. What typically happened was psychological. I mean, the defenders at that point would make a morale check, which happens in the game. They would either surrender or run, or occasionally they would stay and fight, right, when you hear the dramatic hand-to-hand. But that was relatively rare if you got close enough where they felt like this isn't worth it anymore. So I can go on. That's just one set of morale checks. There are more other specific sets.
Yeah, that's awesome. That reminds me of a lot of the history that you read, and not just about World War II. That I think that psychological element of not wanting to die in that way certainly is the story you hear about the Civil War as well, where bayonets were very rarely used.
That's right. Or ancient battles. I mean, humans haven't changed that much. Nobody wants to get into hand-to-hand fighting if they can avoid it. So, and I think what's a wonderful Slytherin game that does it to a limited extent, the morale checks and the melees and so forth. I'm blanking on it right now. It came out recently in Ancient Warfare. You must have played on your channel, Matthew.
Aggressor's Rise of Rome's coming out soon. It hasn't come out yet. I'm trying to think of the other.
This is a tactical Ancients one.
Field of Glory?
Thank you. That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah, because your troops often will break before melee in that game.
And then you can get group routes. I mean, it's pretty cool. So
you get cascade routes and everybody runs away and you get pissed while your whole line is gone.
Which happened.
So I'm kind of curious. This game is, as you were mentioning, this is going to be a huge game in terms of the scope and the complexity in terms of the design and the programming and all that. How big is your development team? I know the name of your company is Green Tree Games. How many people do you have developing this game?
So if you go to our website, birdandcommand.com, and you go to the team stage, I'm saying this because I think they're pretty cool people, so I hope people go look. So I'll give you an impression. So as a whole team, I'd say we're roughly 3 what's called FTEs, meaning full-time employees. Okay, that's across all the artists, writers, coders, etc. So you can think of us essentially 1 programmer, 1 writer, 1 artist. Probably these are all like 75% each of those, and 1 scenario guy. Now, in actuality, if you go look at the list, it's about 13 people because there are a lot of people there doing part-time and so forth, putting a few hours in a week. I'm one of the few really full-time people, essentially. So we've drawn a lot of expertise, but we're a lot bigger. We look a lot bigger than we are. You should think of us as a quite small indie, probably being overly ambitious, but we're persistent.
Yeah, I love small indies. That's where all the innovative ideas come from.
Well, and the other thing we do is, humble. We try to draw on experts. So early on, I got Chris Avalon in, as a famous RPG writer, and Alexis Kennedy, who's on Cultist Simulator and is a known writer, done lots of wonderful things. And we brought in William Bernhardt, who's a famous novelist. He playtests and he's read every single narrative scene, give us feedback, and he's an author who has sold tens of millions of copies of his detective novels. And I just don't want to keep on. There's a long list there. And then we brought some famous scenario designers in from the wargaming side. Steve Overton is known in Combat Mission. The 2 writers, Paul and Alan, are known for their enact fiction. Go to Steam and see what their reviews are like. They get good reviews. I put a lot of work into finding the artists. And then we've got some wonderful vets, so forth, who help us on getting the tanks and units right so the grognards don't beat us up too badly on barrel length and so forth. And, thickness of the steel, just for fun, by the way. I hope some people noticed in the tactical teaser we put out recently that we did not trot a Tiger out. We trotted out, for those who know, a Stu, which is not a very glamorous German armored vehicle, but was very common. And it was the kind of thing you were going to run common for a German vehicle.
I think it was the most manufactured armored German vehicle of the war.
What's that?
I think the Stug 3 was the most manufactured armored vehicle for the German military during World War II.
That's right. Now, that doesn't mean most of the U.S. Soldier GIs didn't think they were about to face a Tiger or even persisted in thinking they faced a Tiger. They typically said that, but they didn't meet Tigers at the percentage they thought they did. So it was typically these guys. But still, when you're flesh and blood, Stug's pretty intimidating, as you can see in the tactical teaser when guys start to panic when they see the Stug up here.
That reminds me, I forget which war movie. It might have been Band of Brothers, but it might have also been... oh my goodness, A Bridge Too Far. But there was a scene in one of these war movies where they're asking, the tankers how much armor they have on it, and the tanker's like, "There's not much." Essentially, he's like, "Well, how much do you think this sleeve has, or something like that?"
Well, I hope you notice that the thing I keep coming back to is we just keep the focus all the time on really three things: leadership, on people on the battlefield. Like any of us could have been, look at some of the pictures of the young men who went into that war. Any of us could have ended up on those battlefields, right? Coming from about to go to college or go to work and go onto the farm, and suddenly we're on a field in Morocco, right? People are shooting at us to kill. So we're trying to bring out the humanity, we're trying to bring out the emotional side, we're trying to bring out the leadership. But of course, you might be a wonderful guy who really cares about your men, but if you can't do the right tactics, you'll get them killed, and they won't think so highly of you if you survive.
So the one question I have, I'm going to kind of mold it into two, would be, are the scenarios in the game based on actual World War II battle engagements? And the soldiers in those scenarios, are they based on real-life soldiers or inspired by them in some way?
That's a great question, and part of it's quite tricky. So part of it was easy, which is we knew we wanted to do historically, accurate scenarios. So they're all taken from the battles the real cotton balers fought. We have a Bible written by our consulting historian, which I think I failed to mention so far. My apologies, Professor McManus. So Professor McManus is an eminent military historian, wrote a book on the cotton balers, American Courage, American Carnage, and we follow it carefully. That's your cheat sheet if you want to cheat and not the real experience. But read it afterwards. See what they did. That will give you an idea what they did. So we do the real battles, but we do cherry pick. One of our principles is, it's a game first. So it's not a history book. It's a game first. So we will bend history. We try not to break history, but we will bend it to give you an interesting experience. So meaning, for example, we cherry pick the best battles, right? So there was no one company that had all the most interesting, tactical experiences or dramatic experiences. So we tend to pick those. So you're a fictional company within an historical, battalion and regiment. And your lieutenants. Now let's get into the tricky side. Tricky side is real people, right? So one of the things we keep in mind, especially since there are a lot of vets on the team and vets who've been in combat and been in different services, we're touching on, tricky things. So we want to be very respectful. Part of respect is not judging historical characters easily. So you read McManus' book as an historian, he'll tell about some decisions by certain commanders or superiors that, at a distance seem like pretty bad decisions, got people killed. But, I wasn't there. And the guy might have been having a bad day. And you don't know the whole context. So one of the things, guidance I gave the writers early, is let's be very careful about, painting historical figures as bad decisions because, do we have the right? So we tend to limit those. So we'll allude to them occasionally or point to the history. We do bring in historical characters where, we can point to the good things they did. There are some amazing people who led the cotton balers, and we're very happy to tell some of their true stories. And historical people of note that showed up will show up. I won't spoil it, but there's some pretty interesting people that show up. And I can give you one spoiler. This isn't a big spoiler, but you will run into the Free French and so forth because cotton balers did run into the Free French down in the south, not in Normandy. We don't go to Normandy, southern France. So which is an interesting campaign. My father's an historian. Was an historian, so I like to keep pointing out because he's my hero. So it's pretty important to me to do right by history, but still, it's a game first.
Yeah, I mean that sounds really interesting, especially when you said Free French. I was that was.
Well, Jean would like that. Are you of French descent?
No, I'm from. My family's from Poland, but I've been very fascinated lately with I call it Napoleon and the French Revolution. I literally had a class on that, and we're going to kind of go through it again through another class. So, I have a lot. I have a great interest in how France grew during the French Revolution and World War One, World War Two. So,
I really want to know more about that myself. Actually, I'm weak on that. The Poles are amazing. They're such a brave people. I would personally love to do a free Poles campaign. Starting in Warsaw with the conquest of Poland during World War II, and then they go over to England, and then they fought in the desert, and they fought in Normandy. So I think that'd be really fascinating. Our portrait artist is Polish, and I bet he'd love to do some work for us for that. Mario Kozak, he's done a lot of the Total War art.
So you're kind of hinting at future DLC?
Of course, and I encourage everyone listening, we love to get campaign suggestions. We write them all down, we really do. And we'll probably go back for feedback to you guys, what you want to do. We'll do a mix of what I'd call sort of artsy ones and, popular ones. So we'll pick obvious ones for future because, we want to have enough money to do more campaigns, but we'll also pick obscure ones we just think are interesting to do. I don't know if the Poles will sell well or not, right? That might be a little artsy, or maybe Spanish Civil War, I think be interesting. Or one weird thing to do would be a Soviet commissar in World War II, which were the political officers.
Yeah, that would
be cool. The problem is if you're the commissar, you don't care about your men, right? Like they
just
send them all up to their death.
Right, but maybe some of the commissars may have thought they were pretty moral people, just not the way you and I think about it.
Sure.
Right? They thought they were good communists. It might be hard for Americans to think about what a good communist thinks being good is. Maybe that communist changed his mind over time. I don't know. I'm weak on that history, so I don't have any strong preconceptions. But it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think, and I love the idea of kind of how modular this concept could be, because really, when you're talking about leadership in command situations, it's every single conflict that's ever occurred, right? These are dilemmas that any leader in any conflict would occur. The scenarios are different, the conditions are different, but at the end of the day, you're still responsible for other people's lives, and it seems like that's what you're trying to model.
Well, you put your finger on it. I mean, what's exciting to us and to the team is, I think to some of the people interested in the game, is it's such an untapped area. I mean, there have been so many games of various parts of military history, but it's kind of shocking. There just aren't really, generally speaking, games intimately focused on the leadership experience, especially at the small unit level. I mean, you can point to exceptions, but generally not. So it's an open field of what to do next. I mean, our example that'd be fun would be Bridge Too Far, right? What about a campaign that's just a few days, the Red Devils, the British paratroopers, trying to hold out in Arnhem against incredible odds? I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? So there's a lot along that. But as you said, the burden of command, Matthew brought up an important thing. What is the burden of command? The burden of command at its core is your responsibility, your inherent tension between your responsibility to the mission which is a moral responsibility, your responsibility to your men, which is a moral responsibility. But there are many ways to lead, right? So is it immoral to try to win the mission and cost a lot of lives? I don't think that's clearly immoral, because, maybe it's more important to beat the Nazis. You might save thousands more lives because you were ruthless with your own men. On the other hand, I think you can make a pretty good argument for taking care of your men and maybe doing some withdrawals. But then maybe more people died. Maybe more Americans died because of your decision there. So, who's to say what the right answer is? And we like those kind of tough, great decisions where you have to decide, what you believe. And it may not even be what you believe. It might be what's effective. So, you think I'm the ruthless guy. I understand that it's all about winning the war, and I'm going to win the war. Well, guess what? Your soldiers are good guys, but they don't particularly want to die, and they're not going to trust you if you're constantly getting killed. And so then they won't follow you when you say follow me, because they think of you as the butcher. And so then, maybe you're not so effective in the field because they didn't trust you. But if you're a bleeding heart and always trying to protect them and take care of them, maybe you're failing your mission. And then the superiors don't really want to support you, or you're going to run into trouble long term. Or maybe things go badly for you because you're not winning. So we want to keep it tough for you. And what are some of the other burdens? I'll give you one more example. Modern soldiers know this burden: civilian lives, right? So we all know how ugly it is in a lot of the wars out there right now. Civilians are deeply intermixed with the combatants. World War II didn't have it as strongly, but it was there. So I'll give you a spoiler. You guys are getting all the spoiler out of me. It must be my having to drink scotch tonight for your show. So
That's the secret behind the Single Malt Strategy podcast. You got to get all the developers
brilliant,
liquored up so they tell you everything.
And I thought it was just a cool title. You guys are nefarious. So in Sicily, this is a real. This kind of thing happened for real. There's a point where you're dealing with Germans in a farmhouse, and you have artillery, and the obvious thing is to blow the hell out of them. But you start to realize they're in the farmhouse with civilians, right? So you're still willing to blow them out of the farmhouse. I think it's a pretty reasonable decision to go ahead, but it also might be a reasonable decision to assault, but then maybe you'll lose some of your men. So I still remember that one and what I did. I'm not going to tell you today what I did, but we can have a discussion about it when you've gone through it.
So I'm kind of curious, in that situation, like, would my troops be able to disobey an order or even possibly mutiny?
I'd love to say yes, but we don't have that. And honestly, I'll give you credit tonight. That's a really interesting idea, to have the NPCs and the soldiers sort of have their own moral compass or feeling about what you're doing. So let me be more careful. It's not built into the battlefield tactics, though I think that'd be pretty interesting as a general mechanic in future. So I'm going to remember that and take all the credit.
When you go to Burden of Command 2 and you cover Vietnam, that would be a very appropriate.
We could talk a little bit about Vietnam, because actually there's a author there who inspired us a lot. But on the other hand, now, to be fair to Burden of Command and the writers, actually we definitely handle some of that narratively. So there are lots and lots of moral situations that the writers put you through, as much as possible based on real situations that happened, not necessarily always with the cotton balers, but drawn from other parts of history. So you will definitely they will have moral opinions about what's going on sometimes. And you have to deal with it, right? And deal with their views. And they may not agree with you.
In regards to those troops, I know you mentioned there are going to be events in the game or events in a scenario. What kind of events can we, get a heads up on that will pop up and possibly affect our soldiers?
So they're really two categories. So there are probably 2 or 3 categories of events in terms of when they happen. Then we can talk about the kinds. So there are the sort of core, like you might think of an RPG, that sort of set up the scenario, right? You might be talking to your superiors or giving you a briefing on the battle. Sometimes I paid for a archivist to go into the National Archives in Washington and actually get the after-action reports of the real captains and lieutenants. So we have them, then we scan them with optical character recognition, which is a fancy way to say it makes them searchable. So we can look at the real reports and search them for mentions of a particular battle. So it's a really powerful feeling to read a real captain's report in a battle you're about to model. I mean, it really connects you across time. So there's sort of the setup, and sometimes we put up the actual maps and briefings to some extent that they got. And then you have decisions to make, of course, narratively there and tactically, and what resources you're looking for, and your superior may be giving you certain orders, and how are you responding to those, and that kind of stuff. Then there are things that happen dynamically in the battlefield, in the sense they're triggered by what you do, right? You might go to certain parts of the map, certain things will trigger. And either you with a board game background, there was a game that did this early on called Ambush, where you went to certain hexes, you looked up in a paragraph book, and certain things can happen. So we certainly do that kind of thing. And then there are ones that are called crucibles, that are critical emotional ones that may determine your journey as a person and a leader, that will pop. And then we hope to have a decent library of random ones that you may get and nobody else gets. There's a limit to how much we can achieve in the first campaign, but we will do some of those. So there'll be some, they'll just pop up and you might run in, let's make one up, spirit of, you might run into a prisoner, and you have to decide, if you say into the back, you have time to deal with this prisoner, what are you doing? And nobody else might get that. It might just be probability you got that one. So, but I don't want to oversell again. There'll be a few of those. We'll have more in future campaigns of those. So we'll get more and more dynamic and custom and personalized. And then there's the aftermath kind of ones. And then what these events can affect, oh my God, they can affect pretty much most of the elements of the game. So your decisions in pop-ups or before the battle may affect morale, may affect stress of units, which is sort of long-term morale, may affect their trust, may affect their respect, which is kind of a fancy way to say their experience or your experience. And it may affect literal things in the battlefield. Certain decision you're making may change what reinforcements happen. The writers have a fair amount. We've written a relatively sophisticated scripting engine that's tied into the interactive fiction. So they can write the prose and tell you what's happening, and at the same time trigger nasty things to happen to you and so forth. So there's pretty decent integration of the narrative to the battlefield. We brought in a guy who was a writer for Banner Saga to give us advice on how to make a more compelling narrative experience on the battlefield. So it's not all happening off the battlefield, it's happening on the battlefield too. But we have to be careful because you're in the heat of battle. Do you really want to stop and read a lot of prose? So there's some tricky design decisions, and we'll have to listen to the playtesting on that.
In regards to my soldiers and the officers in my company, will I be able to promote those soldiers? Or, is it event-driven or how does that work?
Great question. There's a limited amount of promotion activity that happens. My original vision is I really want to do it like a Panzer General or Steel Panthers. You evolve everybody and promote them, and you get cool equipment and not. But we've had to limit, how much we can do with our team size. Plus, infantry companies didn't get all kinds of new tanks coming in all the time. Let's be realistic, right? So, they had to make do. Things did evolve, but no, you won't get a lot of. It's very light on a sort of. If you think of XCOM, right, you get a lot of fancy management of your unit, your squaddies off battlefield. It's light on that. So we'll give you a little bit of that. You will get to make some decisions about, for instance, one of the things we'll definitely try to do is squads and your NPCs are accumulating stress from exposure to battle, like the real soldiers. And in World War II, what they learned was everybody breaks. With enough exposure, everybody breaks.
Tell that to Patton.
Yeah, well, Patton didn't have to have quite as much direct exposure, did he?
No, I meant he'd go and slap one of your soldiers, but
exactly.
in any event.
And that happens when our guys are in Sicily. So, a little spoiler. We do get into that a little bit because it was, the Cotton Valors were aware of it. So, for those who don't know, Patton slapped a soldier who he felt was being cowardly, basically. But the guy was, pretty clearly what we call PTSD today. Was called shell shock in World War I, and World War II was called, God, I'm blanking, was it combat fatigue? That's right. So that accumulates, and if you will have to do some management about when you give leave. But if you give leave to one of your better lieutenants, obviously that lieutenant's not available to you at the next scenario. Yeah, you might have a green lieutenant. So, and there is some, and if you get a lieutenant killed, we'll give you a replacement, but it won't be as, obviously, won't have had as much experience and so forth. And if you get a lot of lieutenants killed, then yeah, guess what? Campaign will probably end for you. Because we can only do so many stories, but also because you probably would be relieved at a certain point.
So I'm kind of curious. You mentioned Sicily, you mentioned France. What other, areas will we see in the game?
So the Cotton Bears historically landed in Morocco in 1942. It's the first American entry into Europe. Well, not Europe, but European theater. So you land in Morocco, and then you go on to Sicily, which is not rarely covered, and then into Italy, which was ugly fighting, somewhat World War I like in a lot of places, and Americans got beat up fairly badly, not just Americans, at a number of places in Italy. And then you go into southern France, and that's different. I don't want to give away for players who don't know the history too much how that's different, but that's quite different than Italy.
And also pretty much never, ever gets covered in any war game that I've ever seen before.
One really offhand. I'm sure there's an exception, but pretty rare. So that's a lot of fresh territory. And then you get up into Germany at the end of the war.
Oh, nice. We get to see Germany. That's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And, the psychology of the soldiers is evolving. So I'll tell you what the real story of the soldiers was. We don't have this. We're introducing this more and more as we get more and more sophisticated. We read a really good book recently called World Within War, and it's about the psychological experience of the soldiers in war. So the soldier landing in Morocco in 1942, it's kind of like the guys a little bit, I think, in what's the first-person shooter we talked about earlier?
Call of Duty?
They're very gung-ho. So they were very gung-ho. And the typical kind of speech was, I'm going to kill 90 Nazis today, and tomorrow I'll capture Hitler. And they're 18 and they consider themselves immortal. So that's the way it starts. And we're going to try to model that narratively. But they get in the battlefield. The battlefield is a lot different than they expected. So first off, where is everybody? They've been taught to bayonet straw things. They're assuming they'll have a lot of cool, well, not cool, but they think it's going to be cool. Brave, heroic fighting. And instead, the real accounts sort of like, where the hell's the enemy? I'm being shot at. And I can't even see anybody. We will definitely have fog of war. Maybe not that extreme, but definitely fog of war. So now they're getting, well, this isn't quite like I imagined. And now they're starting to think, oh, I wonder if my buddy John could get injured here or killed. Notice they didn't say themselves yet. So that was how the next stage. So, and then over time, they're starting to see their buddy John die, maybe die horribly. And now they're starting to think, well, holy cow, I might get injured here or possibly even die. So now the next stage is like, maybe but of course I'm smart. And I'm capable. And if I follow good tactics here, and I stick to the foxholes, and I always take a foxhole, I'm going to make it. But then they start to see the randomness of war. Which war is very random, right? People, for no good reason, the mortar lands right in the best shell hole. I mean, in the best, foxhole. So they'll see more of that. And then at a certain point, they start to realize, their time is numbered. So then their psychology gets to be luck. I've got my lucky, rabbit tail or whatever it is, my talisman. If I only, turn my helmet around, I'll be safe because I've always been safe every time I turn my helmet around. So they cling to that. But then they still really I don't want to go on too long, but then they get to the point where, they realize my days are numbered and the bullet will find me. So this is the sad part. By the end of the war, really the psychology is, God, I really hope I get wounded because they know, they're going to go out dead or wounded, probably. They're not going to survive. The bullet will come. So, they're praying for that lucky wound. So that's a real emotional experience of going through war. Go from 18 and immortal to I just hope I get a sufficiently bad wound to be taken out of this.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of war movies.
Yeah, but it's also it's something that comes across in all the war movies. But to your point, like it doesn't come across in games. It just doesn't. Right. Yes, and the funny thing is, the first-person shooters are the games that have, I think, an easier time of trying to model that, and yet they really don't. Like, I remember I played the most recent Call of Duty, the World War II, Call of Duty World War II, and I remember playing through that thinking, like, okay, so you've got like the gung-ho sergeant or whatever guy who's basically gung-ho all the way through. Like, he doesn't change. He's just unrealistically super soldier, cares about the objective, doesn't care about the men. And you don't really see this sort of transformation. There's a little bit, like your character changes a little bit. You kind of grow to understand the importance of the mission over the man. But like, you really don't see an evolution of characters in most of these games. And it's exciting, frankly, to hear that, not only is that something you guys are trying to model, but you're also trying to put the player in the shoes of the leader who is ultimately responsible for these people as well.
Especially, and you may start to have quote unquote irrational, meaning not, what's the best for the situation feelings. Like, here's Dearborn, you're in Germany. In 1945, Dearborn's been faithfully serving you since Morocco. The right thing might be to send Dearborn up the hill, but you might very naturally, and not clearly wrongly, have the feeling like, Jesus, Dearborn doesn't deserve to go up this hill. He survived this long. He's been good this whole time. Maybe I'm not going to send Dearborn up the hill, even though I should. Right? I could see that decision. I think so. There's a wonderful scene in Band of Brothers, where Winters, Captain Winters, one of my heroes, that canal scene. They sent guys over to grab a prisoner, and they brought him back. I think that all happened. And they've done a great job. And now the Superior says, oh, great. Well, send somebody else to capture another prisoner. And Winters decides to basically do, quote unquote, the wrong thing, which is he lies and says that they sent him over again, but he doesn't. So you'll have decisions like that. That wasn't the right military thing to do, but pretty reasonably right human thing to do. So we'll do that. On mechanics, we've been talking a lot of narratives. Let's get back to the tactical for a moment. Stress. So you'll definitely accumulate stress over time from being exposed to battle as well as narrative events. And we don't have we're in evolution on that. That's a long-term thing. I'll tell you my current thinking how that works. I think it's interesting whether we do it or not. So the way I want to do stress is it's essentially you get more and more gun shy, to put it humanly. So when you take fire, if you're stressed, it's magnified to you. So it's more and more threatening. So if you're a squad or NPC and you're stressed, and normally this rifle fire would give you 2 points out of your 10 of suppression, meaning morale goes down by 2 out of 10. Maybe it goes down to 4. So on their end, you're a very experienced guy, right? You know how to fight well. You've been through the war. So we think that the units late war, which we haven't run those scenarios yet, will be kind of glass cannons. They'll be depleted, but they're very effective, but they're brittle. They're very good until they take fire. And really, they start to freak out, put it simply, meaning, they over magnify the threat and they become unresponsive to your orders because they're freaking out. So using them effectively could be very tricky tactically.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know, John, I don't know if you have any other additional questions. All I can say is I think this is, in my opinion, obviously we haven't played it yet, so I can't evaluate what I haven't played, but it does sound incredibly exciting to me and something that I'm definitely looking forward to. I know it was, on my most anticipated list for this year. I don't know if we can still expect to see it in 2018, but it is a game that, is certainly unique and is a game that I can't wait to give a go.
I want to set expectations. So, it's easy to talk glorious things. I promise you we will fail. What I mean by that, we will be inadequate. Please don't just quote that part. We will be inadequate to the experience. But how could we be adequate to the experience? Thank God. But what we're going to do when we talk to the vets, ask them, like, well, why are you supporting this? It's a game about war. Why are you supporting it? They say, well, you can't reflect the experience. But what you do is you point at things that typically aren't pointed at and need to be pointed at, like the burden of command. And that's why they want to support it. They feel that needs to be brought out more. So I just want to say, we're going to fail. We're not going to deliver the experience. First, we're not going to deliver World War II culture as it was. They were a different group of people. We're still learning to understand how they saw the world. They were much more, honestly, there was a lot more racism, overt racism. There was a lot more religion. They looked much more to the Christianity or Judaism or whatever to guide them than maybe in more modern wars like Vietnam. It was a different world. We are going to point to a lot of that, but we're not going to be sufficient for it. And of course, we'll fail tactically. The tanks won't be as good. But I hope what people will do is see what we're trying to achieve, the direction we're trying to go, and we will get better each campaign. We will get more credible and we'll connect more to what was going on because, everybody in this team cares about it, has a lot of passion. And so we're all constantly getting more informed about what was really going on.
Well, every game, in my opinion, has a different objective, right? And the way I try and look at games is no one's going to get everything right. It's a question of, are you modeling what you're trying to do adequately? So I'll use War in the Pacific as an example. I don't know if you've played War in the Pacific. It's a Matrix game. It's made by Gary Grigsby. In my mind, that game's about logistics. It's about sort of being able to develop a game that communicates the challenges and the hurdles of fighting a Pacific war across vast distances and the industrial might that was required to be able to overcome, from an American perspective, the Japanese, and from a Japanese perspective, to hold back the Americans. That is fundamentally the story the game is trying to tell. Scourge of War is a very different game, which is looking at Scourge of War Gettysburg, all the Civil War versions, or even Napoleon, the Waterloo game. Those games are really trying to tell the difficulties of commanding large armies and sort of the challenge of commanding through multiple layers of command. So they've got this amazing courier system where you give orders, but they're delayed. And it really communicates the grandeur of the battlefield, but also the challenges of commanding large bodies of troops in the age of sort of linear combat. And it sounds like what you guys are going for is obviously there's a lot of heart and soul put into the game as a whole, but it sounds like the element you guys are trying to represent is really, to your point, that not necessarily, I don't know if moral is the right word, but that dilemma of, as a commander, you have responsibilities to the mission, but you also have responsibilities to your men. And then the dilemmas and the challenges that poses to you as an individual leader of men close to the front or at the front that you don't get in top-down games like Hearts of Iron, which might be more of again, a grand strategy game, or War in the Pacific, which really isn't about the individual soldier. It's about the whole machine. This game is much more about, again, the individual soldier and the experience that the leader is trying to, manage. At least that's what it sounds like your objective
Well,
is.
thank you. I mean, right, there has to be a focus. And the focus here is the burden of command, right? So what does that mean? Well, it means the emotional burdens. It means it doesn't just mean emotional burdens. It's not just a feeling game. It means the command burdens. So it's about the leadership experience, which is a human experience and a tactical experience, and maybe rarely visited experience in games.
So, by the way, Jean, when we go back and edit this, we need to make sure to have a little snippet at the front where it says, burden of command developer, I promise we will fail. And then we'll just put that in at the front of the episode.
I like that. That sounds like a good idea. I'm going to do that.
That's a good start. That will get people's attention.
One question I have is the game uses dynamic events to affect the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
How many different possible outcomes can there be for the overall scenario?
So the scenario doesn't have a lot of dynamic outcomes, except in the sense that you can succeed or fail to various degrees. And we'll probably score those around, how well you're preserving the men versus how well you're achieving the objectives. Where we mean dynamic events mean, you can definitely make, obviously, like any tactical game, you can make a lot of different decisions how you fight the battle. But you can make narratively and so forth different decisions what you do with men and what resources you choose, and whether Dearborn wants to do this and you decide to support him or not. Wilson wants to do that. So those will change the course of the battle. But I do not want to pretend this is a branching, dynamic, campaign system. It's not. But you will change their lives and your own lives and your own personal journey, and who survives and who won't, and how the battles go, and both by your battlefield tactical decisions and your narrative decisions.
It sounds like the branching and dynamic element is start state of your men and end state of your men, right? That's the dynamism. Is that fair to say?
I think I put it this way, right? If you're playing a Steel Panthers or Panzer General, or you're playing an RPG, what you're doing on the tactical field affects the state of your units, right? They change and they evolve and they take damage or they gain experience. But just like in an RPG, you can make significant decisions in Banner Saga or name your favorite other RPGs that change things for them too. And that's true for us too. So it's all about the how in particular, your subordinates and yourself change and evolve, and then to a lesser extent, but still matters, your squads.
Okay.
But we hope you'll come away with, you'll be thinking about, oh my God, that wasn't, I hope you'll come away not just, oh, that was a really interesting tactical battle. I sure hope you do that. I mean, I love tactical stuff. But I hope you come away with, what I come away with is, I got one of the lieutenants killed. I still remember that, how it happened. It's never left me, even though it's just a game. And I remember things like that civilian decision. I remember another decision in Germany I made, the bastard writers, that seemed like the right decision at the time. And, just to give credit to Alan and Paul, one of the more, I'll tell you two weird anecdotes. One of the more compelling situations, unbelievably, is when I have to deal with logistics around gasoline supply. Oh my God, the decision I made there came back and haunted me narratively for like 3 more events, and I was sweating what was going to happen to me next. And then the other really weird experience was after, being with these guys, and by being with the guys, I mean not only your portraits, your NPCs and the narrative, but seeing the pictures of the real soldiers, which we're constantly putting in there. In the real scenes, I already started to identify with real soldiers by late war, and Alan put up what should have been intrinsically boring, a real report from late 1944, I think, of what's your supply situation, how many bullets you have, how much of this, that, and the other. And the weird thing was, I looked at it with great interest. I actually managed that stuff in the game, but I was really interested because I knew I knew it mattered, and we handled it sort of at an abstract level sometimes in scenarios. But I felt like a company commander. I thought, I got to have enough supplies here for the guys, even though it's not really what we're modeling. But you get this weird investment in being there after a while. So it's interesting how it affects you.
Yeah, I really look forward to that because technically that falls into the burden of command because you got to keep, you guys fed, get them some Budweiser or whatever they drank back then for alcohol.
Budweiser, really? Come on, John. Come on.
We do have 1 or 2 paper scenes which turned out to be better. Papers, Please is a pretty good, successful game. We do one of the two. There was a lot more of that in the real war, but we don't want to make a boredom simulator, so that probably wouldn't sell quite as well.
What was popular back then? Coca-Cola? Let's go to war, get some Coca-Cola.
I would be careful what they were drinking. They did drink. The officers got monthly allotments of hard liquor, which they listed.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Ah.
So there was definitely some class issues there, how the officers were treated versus the enlisted. Though in the battle, they were treated more equally.
If you ever do a Civil War simulator, then you can, as an you can see whether your generals are getting sloshed right before the battle.
Oh my God, the characters in. Yeah. I'd love to do a Civil War high level one time.
Joseph Hooker can be under your command. You have to figure out how you're going to navigate that.
Oh Lord. And all these crazy Southern reports to lead too. I'm from Union, so that's fascinating.
That'd be fun.
And we'll have to make a decision about whether we think Grant was drinking or not, right?
That's a good point.
Maybe you can have two different outcomes if you decide to take that drink or not.
Very good. Very good. Wouldn't that be interesting? They do that pretty well in Band of Brothers if the lieutenant gets into the drink too much.
So I guess the last question that I have would be, what platforms do you plan to release the game on?
It will be Windows initially, and Steam will probably go on to Goog. I don't know how to pronounce it. Goog. I guess Goog.
Good old games.
Good old games, yes. And we're weird. We're in Python base, which may make us more friendly or not to getting onto Mac or possibly Linux, but it will depend on sales. And, then we'll do some math around that, and we'll look at the compatibility. But right now it's going to be a PC game. Now, one of the guys on the team does run it on one of the Mac, PC simulators, because it's not a high-performance game. You can look at the graphics. We're pushing the engine to the last limit. So that may be credible, but I'm not promising that. All I'm promising is Steam Windows.
Okay.
You make Jean a very happy person if you put it on Mac.
That knows me all too well.
The only strategy war gamer I know that plays on Mac.
Good for him. I like Mac.
Yeah, I'm after working for Apple for a couple of years, I worked for Apple and Microsoft, so I can tell you I prefer the Apple platform leaps and bounds. So, yeah. So,
are you able to share any insights on when to expect the game? I mean, in 2018, 2019, somewhere along those lines?
I'll give you my speech on that. My speech on that is I would call myself the Green Lieutenant. Last year I said 2018. It won't be 2018. You can have your scoop there. Basically, here's how it went. Back when we were launching, I said, let's put on the video 2018. And the team said, Luke, I don't think you want to do that. The right answer is you want to say when it's done. Right. I said, no, follow me up that hill to the unsuppressed machine gun. I know. So they said, okay, look. So now I get my, eat my words publicly here, humiliating myself on this podcast. We're going to do some more humiliating of me publicly because I deserve it. So, but I've learned the burden of command here. So I do have the official answer now, and the official answer is when it's done. Now, the good news there is, really, we want to do it right. We won't, to the best of our capacity, release this till it's done right. So we are not going to hit a deadline to hit a deadline. This is too important, and I think of the vets, and I think of the people who died in World War II, and I think of my wife's a vet, and I have a son in the military, and my father served in World War II. I care about this. So I would feel terrible if we do, a broken job. So we're going to try pretty hard. Who knows what will happen, but we'll do a lot of playtesting and so forth, and we will try to deliver the best game we can.
I think that's fair. I mean, I work in product development, so I understand making sure you need to release something that works rather than just something to say you hit a deadline. So that's good to hear that, quality is obviously taking paramount to just getting something out there and starting to sell it.
But, we are getting in. The narrative's been through. It's been play tested a fair bit already, and it's, I think, in pretty good shape and gotten good feedback. And, we're entering the tactical phase, so there'll be more reports. You'll get more and more sense of the game. And, so it won't be like it'll be invisible till it appears.
You're just trying to get on another one of my most anticipated lists for 2019.
No, I would feel guilty for that. You don't have to do that. I would feel bad about it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this game.
Eventually list.
But But I think I agree with Matt. I think it's 100% the right decision. Do it 2019. Do it when the game is ready. So even if you push it to 2020, whatever it may be, this sounds like this is going to be a blockbuster game. So I would love to, make sure it's 100% done. And, this is, in previous interview I did with somebody, I said, this is your baby, so you got to, when you put it out into the world, you got to make sure it's ready.
That's the way we feel. A lot of people, and we have a fair number of volunteers who work very hard for, what are they getting? So, but because they believe in what we're trying to do, so we got to do it right.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions, Matt?
No, I think we're good. I want to thank you, Luke, for coming on to an interview with us, and really looking forward to the game and learning more as you guys can progress down toward eventually releasing the game.
Well, I want to thank you all for this opportunity. And I want to thank any of you who are still listening. But really, it's a privilege to be able to tell the stories, but to have people listen to these stories. So, and maybe, give you a little bit of a taste of what it must have been like to be involved and to connect. I mean, to me, I connect now. I look at the pictures. I feel some connection to these people across time. And that's powerful. And I hope we'll give that to you.
Well, definitely looking forward to it. Actually, by the way, so I'm going to totally destroy your editing job here, Jean, and maybe you'll just leave it as is and show that I don't know how to conduct an interview. We did this last time we had an interview. We completely forgot. We are called the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. And so where applicable, I know, not everybody consumes alcoholic beverages, but I have some intelligence that indicates some individuals on this podcast maybe. I want to make sure that we do homage to our name and ask Luke, are you drinking anything tonight? And if so, what's your beverage of choice?
Surely you could tell I was drinking by now. I mean, after all these weeks, oh my God! So I am drinking. I'm going to horribly mispronounce it. Laphroaig, Laphroaic, which is very peaty. And
I believe it's Laphroaig.
My father did like scotch, and he drank this, so I drink in his honor. And the other little fun historical thing here is I drink it out of a little silver cup from the 1700s that we found on eBay. And we turned out one of my ancestors was a silversmith, and he actually got mentioned Samuel Johnson. And so we looked. My father worked on him. My father was a professional historian, and he found this little silver cup that was made by a great ancestor. So I drink my whiskey out of that. So that's my connection to history while drinking.
That's pretty awesome. And I will also commend you. I know you said you're not much of a scotch drinker, but to be drinking Laphroaig, I mean, that's a very scotch drinker's scotch. By that, I mean, it's very peaty. So it's very heavy. It's not, not a light, airy, drinkable scotch like some other alternatives out there.
All right. So you tell me what you drink.
Well, I'm only drinking a beer tonight, so I don't have any scotch.
You drink. Come on, let's see if these guys are just posers.
I'm drinking a Bell's beer, which is a brewery in Comstock, Michigan. The beer is Oberon Ale, which is kind of like a summery American wheat beer that they make. And I don't know if it's available everywhere. I know it's available kind of in the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, and I live in Illinois now, so I see it quite frequently, but I don't know how widely available this beer is.
Well, I better get one if I do a good job in the game.
I mean, I would probably send you something else that's like actually made in Wisconsin or something like that. If you're looking for that.
Cheese puffs. What are they called? What are the jalapeno
cheese curds?
Cheese curds. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, I'm not a big cheese curd fan, so I don't know what that makes me.
Aren't you? Okay.
But bratwursts are good. Those are.
Yeah, definitely.
It's funny. Actually, the first bratwurst I ever had. This is pathetic because I'm from Wisconsin, but I didn't have my first bratwurst till I was 19, and I was never a big reenactor, like a World War II reenactor. But I had a friend who really was into World War II reenacting, World War I reenacting, and actually he does like Rev War in 1812. And so he brought a friend and I along to a reenactment when we were in college. The first bratwurst I ever had was cooked out over an open fire at a World War II reenactment, which is kind of a surreal experience.
I don't think that's a cool story. I mean, and a Bratwurst, ironically, too, right? A German sausage in your first, probably American World War II recreation. That's a good story.
Yeah. It was actually kind of cool too because it was in Benton Harbor in Michigan. and the reenactment was done with the partnership of the Navy Reserve.
Oh,
They needed, essentially, they have, you know, an allotment to do training, but they don't often get to drop troops onto a beach as part of their training. But it was actually, it was a unit that had landing craft. So they partnered with the organization putting on the reenactment, and they took the reenactors out onto Lake Michigan and then landed them on a beach as if it was like a naval landing. One, they get their training in, and two, the reenactors get to reenact a naval landing.
Well, you'll do more than one landing.
Oh yeah, well you've got southern France, Sicily, and North Africa, right?
All right.
Cool.
nice.
Well, that's all I got now. Not to extend the interview any further, but.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us for this interview with Luke, and thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. You shed a lot of light on this game, and I'm very excited. I know Matt's incredibly excited, and I think this is going to be out of the ballpark home run for this game, because it's something we've never seen before, and it sounds really exciting. Like, it's not just as simple, get this victory point, get this objective, and go at it. It's more in depth than that, and every decision counts. So can't wait to get my hands on it, and hopefully we can get you on the show, around the time of the release, so this way we can maybe get a little more details out of it.
Oh, I'd be delighted to. That'd be fun.
Awesome. All right. I will catch you next time. And
all right. Thanks, all.
Thanks.